Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Alison Brandon and I'll be your webinar facilitator. Here are some housekeeping rules before I introduce our guest speakers and get started on today's session. Please input all of your questions on the chat box below and we will go through them during the Q&A session. Please remain on mute to ensure each speaker is clearly heard across the many people online with this call today. Take a few moments to complete the feedback survey after the webinar. We value your feedback and we use it to improve our future webinars. A recording of this webinar will be distributed via email to you all by the end of next week. Please reach out if you don't receive it. Otherwise, this will all be made available on our social media company pages. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Just running through today's agenda, we will be going through what is the BMSB, the outline of seasonal measures, exempt goods, specific changes for this season, onshore compliance, treatment options, loading rules and guidelines, lessons learned, and the container treatment process. I'd just like to introduce you now to our guest speakers for today. First up, we have Shani Knox, Head of Customs and Compliance for Mondiale VGL. Shani has over 15 years experience in tariff and international trade, and some of you will know her and the work she does on helping you on complex valuation, tariff disputes, import permits, free trade agreements, and duty management. Up next is Ross Shepherd, National Customs Manager here at Mondiale VGL Australia. Ross is also an established and licensed custom broker with over 10 years experience in the freight forwarding and logistics industry. Ross will be covering compliance from a freight forwarder's perspective. And lastly, we have Fred Baloh, our New South Wales warehouse manager at Mondiale VGL. Fred leads and manages both the commercial and operational aspects of Mondiale and container treatment services. And he will be providing a bit more info and insight on our onshore treatment services. Again, big welcome to Shani, Ross and Fred, and let's begin. I would like to head over to Shani to start us off.
Thank you, Alison, for such a warm introduction, and good morning to all. So today we're here to talk about the Brown Marmorated Stink Bug, or BMSB, which not only has an unpleasant name, but an unpleasant nature. In terms of its appearance, it has a shield-shaped body and looks akin to some Australian native species. However, a distinct feature of an adult BMSB are the white bands on the antenna, sides of the abdomen and on the legs. They're also much larger, with adults ranging from 12 to 17 millimeters in length. Its colouring may also vary between shades of red, grey, light brown, copper or black, and when disturbed, emit a pungent odour. So why does it pose such a significant risk for Australia? The BMSB is an agricultural pest and can cause damage to crops, nursery stock and ornamental plants, posing a very significant risk to our multi-billion-dollar horticultural industries. The BMSB also feeds on a large variety of vegetables and fruits, in excess of 300 varieties, and it has a needle-like mouth which it uses to pierce plant tissue, making the plant unfit for human consumption. The BMSB is also highly mobile. Originating in Asia, over the past decade, it has spread and established itself in multiple parts of the world, including the USA and Europe. It also likes to hide and take shelter in cargo, as well as vehicles, machinery and other goods, hitchhiking its way around the world. Given an outbreak can impact our current way of life, the department applies very stringent BMSB risk management measures to keep BMSB out of Australia. Let's now take a look at the measures for the 2022 to 2023 season. Next slide, please, Alison. BMSB seasonal measures will apply to targeted goods manufactured in or shipped from target risk countries that have been shipped between the 1st of September 2022 and 30 April 2023. And to vessels that berth, load or transship from target risk countries within the same period. So we are currently 7 days out from commencement of the season. The shipped on board date on the ocean bill of lading is the date used to determine when goods have been shipped. Effectively, goods arriving into Australia some months after the season finishes can still be subject to BMSB measures. It is important to consider that all other goods that are not subject to BMSB intervention but have been packed in a container with target high risk or risk goods will also be caught up in the measures. Consideration needs to be given to shipment packing and scheduling. At this point in time, there has been no announcement from the department regarding random inspections or onshore verification activities for air freight shipments. As the season progresses, this could change, and we will communicate any updates in this space as they are revealed. Next slide, please, Alison, as we go through the target risk countries. So these are the countries that fall in scope of BMSB. Important to note that there is no changes on the 2021-2022 season. Japan also remains on the list, but for heightened vessel surveillance, meaning goods from Japan are not subject to BMSB measures. The department throughout the season will continue to review risk pathways and supply chains and make adjustments as required to manage the risk of BMSB. There are 2 countries that have been added to the list of emerging risk countries for this season, being China and the United Kingdom. Belarus, Malta, Sweden and Chile had been removed. Plastic articles, toys and furniture items from China and the UK will be subject to random onshore verification. For China, this will apply for shipments from 1st of September 2022 to 31st of December 2022, and the United Kingdom from 1st of December 2022 through to 30th of April 2023. The target high-risk goods caught up in the measures cover 24 chapters of the harmonised tariff. They are commonly imported items and include articles of wood, ceramic products, metal articles and glassware. So here we have even more products included. So it's quite an extensive list of commodities. However, important to note, there has been no changes on last season. So just to confirm, goods that are classed as target high risk and shipped from a target risk country will require mandatory treatment. We will now look at target risk goods. So once again, a lot of commonly imported articles, including chemicals, paper and paper products, rubber articles, etc. But again, no changes on last season. So target risk goods are not subject to mandatory measures, however, may be subject to random onshore inspection. Now passing over to Ross to discuss the exemptions.
Thanks, Shani. So exempt goods are very minimal for the 2022-23 BMSB season, and they follow very closely to what the exempt goods regulations were for the past season. So these are the exempt goods are any goods packed inside a container and sealed inside that container prior to the 1st of September 2022. Exemptions can be sought in this regard by the provision of a sealing declaration that proves the container was packed and sealed prior to September 1st. These containers must be shipped within 21 days of the container being sealed to be eligible for the exemption. Goods that have been stored or transported to a non-target risk country prior to the 1st of September. This is again an exemption that's been around for a few years now, but in the past season or two, we've seen the department move to crack down on what they believe is evidence, proof of these goods moving to a non-target risk country prior to the season. The only acceptable documentation now to prove that your goods moved from a target risk country to a non-target risk country prior to the 1st of September is the actual shipping documents. So a bill of lading and commercial invoice, proof that those goods actually did move. One of the biggest exemptions that we see used, thankfully it's gained in popularity a lot, is the new unused and not field tested or NUFT declaration. So this is for a select range of goods, namely machinery, complex machinery that's manufactured wholly after December 1st, 2022. The chapters that are covered by this exemption are chapters 82, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, and 89. So by and large, they are complex machinery, vehicles, boats, and airplanes. Again, we must prove to the department that the goods were manufactured after the 1st of December 2022. That proof comes in the form of a new and unused, not field tested declaration provided by the manufacturer that states the manufacturing date. Lastly, there is an exemption for household goods and personal effects, which are transported into Australia as unaccompanied personal effects. Next slide, please, Alison. So what's new for this season? Largely, not a lot. Shani's already touched on the emerging risk countries that have been added this year. So in previous seasons, we saw a lot of European countries outside of those that are already target risk countries showing as emerging risk countries. That's been narrowed down substantially this year to China and the United Kingdom, where the random inspections on goods from these countries will be largely limited to the dates you can see there. So China, 1st of September to the 31st of December, and the UK from the 1st of December to the 30th of April. We've also seen that chapters 39, 94 and 95 will be subject to random inspections for these two emerging risk countries. Now 39 is already a target risk good, so already subject to random inspections for target risk country shipments, but 94 and 95, so that's largely furniture and toys, new chapters that are not currently covered by the BMSB measures, so they'll be inspected at random to see if the regulations need to be expanded. One of the biggest changes that we've seen this year is extra time allowed on the 120-hour policy. So as it stands, all goods must be sealed inside a container or loaded on board a vessel within 120 hours of the treatment being concluded. For break bulk goods, open top containers and flat rack goods, this 120-hour window can be expanded by an extra 48 hours if evidence can be provided that the date of loading or shipping was caused by the shipping line and not by a change of mind or a change of plan by the freight forwarder. Again, we will need some kind of documentary proof from the shipping line or from our origin officers to allow us to apply for that extra 48 hours. But it will, in some instances, mean that containers and bulk goods that were delayed slightly suddenly don't have to be re-exported and treated before they get allowed into Australia. The department are working to try and free up some resources. As you all know, we've seen a lot of delays in previous seasons due to the extra workload that this puts on departmental staff. So this year, the inspection types for BMSB containers have been changed. So they now unpack inspections instead of secure seals intact inspections. So basically what this means is that it allows the approved arrangement to complete more of the opening of the container and unpacking of the container without having to have a departmental representative present. So that frees up the officers to conduct more inspections on a daily basis to try to minimise the impact that BMSB season causes on delays to shipments. Next slide, please. The department conducts random verification inspections on target risk and target risk goods. Should the presence of BMSB be detected, goods will be directed for onshore treatment. It's important to note that treatments can only be completed in a metropolitan location. In addition, goods from known risk pathways or supply chains that have had a previous BMSB detection may also be subject to DAFF inspections, and further intervention may include inspection and/or retreatment. Known risk pathways are subject to review throughout the season. In addition to the above, the department will be undertaking compliance activities to monitor and detect the use of fraudulent treatment certificates. It's important that for treatments conducted in target risk countries, the BMSB certificate is from an approved treatment provider, and that the treatment provider has submitted the treatment certificate to DAFF through the required pathways. Any shipment identified with a fraudulent certificate will be directed for onshore treatment if permitted, or exported, which can be a very costly exercise. Offshore treatment at origin. So the three options for treatment remain the same. They've remained the same for a few years now. They are heat treatment, methyl bromide, or sulfuryl fluoride. Methyl bromide's not allowed in Europe. It was outlawed there some time ago, due largely to it being an ozone depleting substance. But thankfully in other countries, there are exemptions in place purely for quarantine purposes. Methyl bromide and sulfuryl fluoride treatments can be problematic in some colder countries at the depths of the season, as there are minimum temperatures required within the container to ensure that the treatment is effective. We've seen in the past seasons that for some portions of the season in some countries or even some regions of certain countries, heat treatment becomes the only viable option. And it's very important to note that offshore treatment providers are required to reapply each year for their accreditation. So please check and don't assume that a treatment provider that you've used in past seasons is approved again this year. Registered treatment providers can be seen through the links on this page when the presentation is provided to you. Once again, a reminder, all break bulk, flat rack and open top consignments require mandatory treatment at origin. There's no dispensation for this type of goods arriving in Australia untreated, and they'll be either denied from discharging off the vessel or ordered for immediate re-export if they do arrive untreated. Onshore treatment in Australia, the options here are the same as described for offshore treatments, although we rarely encounter temperatures too low for methyl bromide and sulfuryl fluoride in Australia, as the season tends to be across Australia's warmer months. Methyl bromide is by far the most common treatment used, with sulfuryl fluoride and heat generally only used when methyl bromide is not an option. This is largely due to sulfuryl fluoride and heat being more costly options or more time consuming, or both. Mondiale VGL offers all three treatment types in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Fremantle. And in Adelaide, we can assist with methyl bromide and sulfuryl fluoride treatments. We also work closely with external service providers to assist with options not available within Mondiale VGL, or when our workload is above our capacity, to ensure the most timely and cost-effective service to our clients. Prior to the 1st of December departures, all target high-risk goods require treatment, either offshore or onshore, but we start to see a reduction in those treatment requirements later in the season as the new and unused and not field-tested exemptions start to kick in. This in turn eases the stresses on both treatment providers here and at origin, and the department's inspectors, so we can expect shorter delays later in the season. Goods will never be released into Australia without a valid treatment or exemption. In past seasons, we did see exemptions given in some special circumstances, but that was stamped out completely in the 2021-22 season and looks to be the same again for the 2022-23 season. The form you see here on this slide is an agreement to treat form, allowing Mondiale VGL to treat goods in your containers. This form will be distributed to everyone, all of our importers after this call. It's a form that needs to be completed once each season, basically permitting Mondiale VGL to conduct treatments on your containers. There are pros and cons for offshore and onshore treatment. When we look at offshore, it's often more expensive than treatment here in Australia. And the treatment time, as already discussed, the treatment type depends on the time of year and the origin. We can see delays at origin, similar to here in Australia, where service providers are simply too busy to keep up with the demand. That's definitely can be an issue. The pros for offshore treatment, on the other hand, are that it often results in a faster turnaround at the Australian border, reducing the chances of detention and storage charges. It also reduces importation costs, such as underbond movement and movement to inspection locations. It should also mean that if your goods are all treated offshore, it should only see a low percentage of your shipments going for verification inspection, rather than 100% of shipments requiring fumigation upon arrival. Onshore treatment, on the other hand, it minimises the chance of having to re-fumigate due to a suspended provider. We generally don't see treatment providers in Australia have their permissions revoked, whereas every season we do see at least one or more offshore treatment providers who have issues and have their treatment license suspended for some period of time. Treatment in Australia is also generally considered to be a more high quality fumigation, which generally means less risk of retreatment and also less shipments being subject to random verification inspections, reducing costs. Now, my suggestion would be to work with your Mondiale VGL customer service representative or key account manager to decide what the best option for your specific set of circumstances for your company is, as to whether you treat your goods onshore or offshore. And now I'll hand over to Fred to discuss how to pack containers correctly.
Good morning, everyone. In this section, we will canvass one of the most important areas of BMSB treatment, namely container packing requirements, essentially the do's and the don'ts. For the treatment to be effective and safe for the accredited provider to set up and prepare for the fumigation, the shipment must be loaded in such a way that will allow for heat or the fumigant being utilised to be dispersed throughout the container and its contents. The main points to consider are never to exceed the maximum floor and wall loading requirements, always to ensure that the load is distributed evenly across the container and that correct strapping, bracing and dunnage is used to secure the shipment and prevent movement during transit. Incidentally, a significant percentage of cargo accidents can be traced back to origin and the incorrect or poor packaging practices. A container that requires a BMSB treatment upon arrival in Australia and that has not been packed correctly at origin will require what is known as a 4.7 treatment by an accredited supplier such as Mondiale VGL. Once the service provider has opened the container and the fumigator determines that a straightforward treatment cannot take place and that a partial or a full unpack and reload within the prescribed guidelines is required, that is, that the goods are appropriately placed and spaced into one or more containers. The container doors, unfortunately, then are resealed. The treatment cannot proceed until an amended direction is received from the department for an approved movement. It's only at this stage that the transfer of the goods under control conditions can take place. This, of course, has now resulted in a delay and an additional cost to the importer that could have been avoided in the first instance. On this next slide, we see some examples of container packaging. The image on the right demonstrates the correct way to load a container. To be treated with a fumigant, it is best to leave a gap of approximately 30 centimeters of goods to allow for either heaters or fans to be strategically placed to assist in the heating of the ambient air temperature and or dispersing the gas around the container. Room must also be made available for the placement of the 3 monitoring lines that are required. Image on the left does not allow enough room to place any equipment required and the treatment could not be successfully completed. On this next slide, the image on the right demonstrates an acceptable load for treatment, and on the left, a load where a 4.7 treatment would be required. Packaging and wrapping also plays an important role in the safe transportation of goods and whether a shipment can be treated successfully. Goods should not be wrapped or covered in such a way that would prevent the fumigant or heat from circulating and penetrating around all the surface of the goods. In certain circumstances, commercial packaging may need to be removed, opened or slashed to allow for gas to reach the surfaces of the commodity and thus achieve a successful treatment. For example, some fruit and agricultural products. On the next slide, please. Again, further examples of packaging. On the left, slashing of wrapping would need to be carried out for a successful treatment to take place, whereas the image on the right shows that the goods are properly presented for treatment. On the next slide, the image on the right, again, is an example of the most effective type of wrapping to use, as the pre-cut gaps allow for the fumigant gas to reach the surfaces of the goods. The image on the left clearly shows that the pallet wrapping would need to be slashed prior to any treatment commencing. So lessons that we've learned from the last season. Shortly, you'll see a slide that will show a flow chart of the treatment process and the average turnaround time from the time of the vessel's arrival on a step-by-step basis. As in previous years, delays were again occasioned last year for several reasons, such as the blacklisting of suppliers, the need for post-BMSB treatment inspections, congestion on our site due to backlogs created with volumes of container arrivals into our yard. Delays can also be the result of severe weather conditions and even stevedore strikes. which ultimately slows the movement of the containers from the wharf to our yard. The container packing issues, as demonstrated in previous slides, necessitating 4.7 treatments, again causes delays. Again, more importantly, of recent times, the effect of COVID on the supply chain, the frequency of vessels arriving and the increased volumes of containers with goods being imported. This year, we will once again be prioritising treatments on the first in, first out principle, followed by container detention dates. From time to time, it will, however, be necessary for some containers to jump the queue so as to avoid large detention charges. After an application and approval from the regulatory body last year, our designated fumigation pad has doubled in size. The increased footprint will allow us to maximise the number of containers that we can now have placed for treatment. This expanded area should assist us in minimising delays in congestion and surges in volumes of containers arriving. Further, our one-track platform has also been updated so that you will have far greater visibility of the progress of your container through the treatment process by way of comments and notes that will be added. Your customer service representative will be able to assist you in locating this information. You need to go back to Ross to complete the section.
Thanks, Fred. As I've touched on earlier, we can expect offshore treatment providers to be suspended at some stage through the season. Thankfully, it seems to be improving year on year. Last year, there was only 1 or 2 suspensions happened through the season for offshore treatment providers, but unfortunately, they do seem to be inevitable. Every season, we've seen 1 or more suspended, and that results in goods either having to be retreated here on arrival, or if you've got goods that are either break bulk, open top, or flat racks, we've seen a lot of those have to be either rerouted on their way to Australia so they can be fumigated at places like Singapore or Malaysia, or there are very rare occasions where we are allowed to some in-transit provisions to allow treatment of those goods upon arrival in Australia, so long as it happens within 48 hours of the goods arriving. That's only in place if the suspension happens while the goods were on the water and in select circumstances. It's also important, very important, that importers are vigilant when they are unpacking their goods and they report any BMSB-like pests or other pests seen to either Mondiale VGL directly or straight to the department. The minimal delays this may cause will be far outweighed by the costs and livelihood damage that could be caused if pests like BMSB get a foothold within Australia. We rely very, very heavily on importers to play their part in the biosecurity of Australia. Unfortunately, we also can know that we will see Department of Agriculture and Forestry and Fisheries delays. It's a different acronym this year, as it seems to be every couple of years, but unfortunately it's the same old story. We see the increase on the burden of inspections and fumigations and associated document processing build up due to the BMSB season, and we end up seeing substantial delays throughout the season with the department. We're working quite closely with our industry bodies, the Freight and Trade Alliance and the IFC-BAA, who are working very closely as well with the government to provide extra resource and implement better practices to minimise the impact of delays and costs on the importers into Australia. The department have implemented some new practices like the change in inspection type, but also others outside of the BMSB regulations that are aimed at speeding up the service provided by the department to help minimise such delays. But it is likely that we'll still see some type of substantial delays with the Department of Agriculture this year. Thanks, Alison. I'll pass back to Fred.
Finally then, with the final slide, this is the flowchart that was referred to earlier, which relates to the treatment process. Copies of this will be made available upon request. This will give you a better understanding of the timeline from the container arrival, the possible delays once containers have arrived, the treatment, the biosecurity release being obtained, and the cleared container delivered to you, our customer. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I can see from the chat that we haven't had any questions submitted as of yet, but I encourage everyone after this webinar to submit any questions you have through to the registration link. And following this webinar, a copy of this presentation will be sent to each of you. So thank you for your time today and have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you and bye-bye.